The thought of not just living a long life, but a really vibrant, capable one, that's incredibly compelling, isn't it?
It really
It
is.
feels like we're right on the edge of some, well, major breakthroughs in understanding how we age and maybe even enhancing what our bodies and minds can do.
Absolutely. And we've gathered some fascinating material for today, looking at the science of aging itself, and also how technology is starting to directly connect with our most complex organ, the brain. It's a really dynamic field right now.
Okay, so for you listening, our goal in this deep dive is to really extract the most significant insights from these developments. We're going to explore two key areas.
Right.
First, the surprisingly active role of what are called senescent cells in aging and what we might be able to do about them. And second, we'll be looking at the cutting-edge work in brain-computer interfaces with a focus on Neuralink and the exciting possibilities, but also some, crucial things to keep in mind that come with this tech.
Precisely. We want to give you a clear, engaging understanding of these complex topics, sort of like getting the core insights without having to wade through all the original research yourself.
Okay, sounds good. So let's jump right into these senescent cells. What are they exactly?
Well, cellular senescence is basically when cells undergo changes in their genetic programming and they stop dividing. Think of it like a cell hitting a point where it just can't replicate anymore.
Okay.
And this can be triggered by various stresses on the cell, like damage to their DNA or inflammation, things like that.
Okay, so there's cells that have essentially stopped working in the traditional sense of making more cells. Is that the idea?
That's right. But the thing is, these senescent cells don't just become inert. They actually start releasing a whole cocktail of molecules. This is known as the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SASP short.
They stay as...
Yeah, and this SASP includes stuff like pro-inflammatory cytokines, which can, stir up inflammation in the body, and proteases, which are enzymes that can break down surrounding tissues. So these stopped cells can actually cause problems around them as we get older.
So these, retired cells are still making their presence felt and not necessarily in a good way. Now, there was some really interesting research looking at just how much impact these cells could have, specifically in mice, right?
Yes. This mouse study was quite striking. Researchers took a very, very small number of senescent fat precursor cells, they're called pre-adipocytes, and transplanted them into young mice.
How small are we talking?
We're talking really tiny amounts, like 0.01 to 0.03% of the total cells in the mouse, or maybe 0.28% right in the local area where they put them.
Wow, okay, that sounds like an incredibly small fraction. What effect did it actually have?
Despite this tiny number of cells, the young mice showed noticeable impairments in their physical function. Their walking speed decreased, for example.
Just from that small amount?
Just from that. And this effect lasted for months, even after the transplanted senescent cells themselves were no longer detectable, which happened within about 40 days.
Wait a minute. So the problem stuck around even after the initial bad cells were gone. That's really unexpected.
Yeah, it was. And what's particularly interesting here is the suggestion that these initial senescent cells might have triggered a kind of cascade.
Like a domino effect?
Kind of, yeah, causing some of the host's own healthy cells to also become senescent. The researchers found more cells with a senescence marker called TAF+ in the visceral fat of these mice.
Okay.
And even in muscles far away from the injection site, they saw higher levels of other indicators of senescence. Things like P16-INK4A, that's a protein linked to stopping cell division, and TNF and IL-6, which are inflammatory signals. It really points to this senescent state potentially spreading.
It's almost like a chain reaction of aging happening at a cellular level. Wild.
And how did older mice react to the same procedure? Was it different? It was. The older mice, these were around 17 months old, they showed even more pronounced declines in physical function when they got the same small proportion of senescent cells.
More pronounced how?
Well, their walking speed dropped more, how long they could hang on a wire was less, their grip strength went down more significantly, and even more dramatically, their chances of survival over the following year were much lower, like a 5.2 times greater risk of death.
Whoa, 5.2 times. That's a huge difference. It really highlights how these senescent cells might accelerate aging, especially in an organism that's already getting on a bit.
Exactly. And the study also looked at how these cells affected their ability to handle other kinds of stress too, right? Like a bad diet.
Right. They introduced senescent cells into mice that were then put on a high-fat diet. And those mice experienced worse physical function compared to mice on the same diet that hadn't received the senescent cells.
So it suggests that having more of these aged cells makes you less resilient to, say, metabolic stress.
Okay, so it seems pretty clear that these senescent cells are not our friends as we age. But the research didn't just identify the problem, it also explored potential solutions, these senolytics we mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly. Senolytics are compounds designed to selectively target and, well, eliminate senescent cells. The hope is that by reducing the number of these problematic cells, we might be able to extend our health span, the years we live in good health.
Right, health span, not just lifespan.
Yeah.
And there was a study that looked at senolytics in human tissue, but like in the lab.
That's right. They took samples of fat tissue from individuals who were obese. Obesity is often linked with more senescent cells. Then they treated these tissue samples with a combination of two senolytic drugs, dasatinib and quercetin, often just called D plus Q.
D plus Q. Okay, and what did they say?
The D plus Q treatment led to a significant reduction in the number of senescent cells in these human tissue samples. They saw fewer cells with those senescence markers we talked about, and they also saw an increase in apoptosis that's programmed cell death, specifically in those senescent cells.
And crucially, it didn't harm the other cells.
That seemed to be the case, yes. The D plus Q didn't appear to harm the overall viability of the other cells in the tissue, or directly affect important immune cells called macrophages.
That's a key point, right? You want to get rid of the bad actors without collateral damage. Did the D plus Q do anything else positive?
Yes, actually. The researchers observed increased levels of proteins called PPARO and CEP, which are important for healthy fat tissue function. They also saw a decrease in the production of those inflammatory cytokines.
Okay, so promising results in human tissue in a dish. But what about in living animals? Did they test D plus Q in mice too?
They did, and the findings there were quite remarkable. They treated very old mice. We're talking 24 to 27 months old, which is really getting up there for a mouse.
Practically ancient.
Pretty much. They gave them doses of D plus Q every 2 weeks.
Okay, and the results for these elderly mice?
The mice that got the D plus Q treatment showed a 36% increase in their median lifespan after the treatment began compared to the control group.
36% longer life just from starting treatment that late.
That's what they found, yeah. They also had a significantly lower risk of death during that period. And perhaps, just as encouragingly, this longer lifespan didn't seem to come with an increase in frailty at the very end. Their physical function in those later months wasn't worse than the untreated mice.
That's really striking. It suggests that intervening even quite late in life by targeting these specific cells can have a substantial positive impact on both how long they live and, crucially, how healthy they are towards the end.
Exactly. This body of research really underscores the causal role senescent cells seem to play in aging and highlights the potential of senolytics as a therapy, maybe even when started quite late.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so senescent cells are a major player, and senolytics might be a way to deal with them. Now let's shift focus a bit to another really hot area in aging research, NAD plus Iman. What exactly is NAD plus and why is it so important here?
Okay, so NAD plus NAD. That stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a vital molecule found in literally all living cells. It acts as a coenzyme.
Meaning it helps other enzymes do theirs.
Exactly. It helps hundreds of different enzymes carry out their functions. And these enzymes are involved in absolutely crucial processes like energy metabolism, how our cells make energy, and how our cells respond to stress. Think of it as an essential helper molecule for many of the cell's most critical operations.
Got it. And what happens to our NAD plus levels as we get older? Do they stay the same?
Unfortunately, no. NAD plus levels tend to decline quite significantly as we age. This happens across many different species, including us humans.
Okay.
And this reduction in NAD plus has been linked to many age-associated diseases and a general sort of increase in vulnerability.
So if NAD plus levels drop with age, the obvious next question is, well, can boosting those levels help? Can it have benefits?
Precisely. And that's where a lot of research is focused. Scientists have been looking at whether supplementing with precursors molecules the body can use to make NAD plus food, like nicotinamide riboside, or NR, and nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN. NR and NMN, you hear those names a lot.
You do. They're investigating if giving these precursors can extend lifespan or improve health span in various animal models, everything from simple organisms like yeast and worms up to flies and mice.
And what are those animal studies showing? Is it encouraging?
In many cases, yes, quite encouraging. Studies have shown that replenishing NAD plus levels can improve the health of mitochondria, remember, the cell's powerhouses.
Right.
It can enhance muscle strength, improve motor function, and in some of these models, it has actually extended their lifespan.
Wow, okay. That sounds really promising. What about specific diseases we associate with aging? Can NAD plus supplementation potentially play a role there? Well, there's definitely ongoing research exploring that. For instance, looking at NAD plus potential to delay the onset of diseases linked to premature aging, which often involve problems with mitochondria and DNA repair. Both NR and NMN have shown some beneficial effects in animal models of those conditions.
And what about brain health? Things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's?
Yeah, there's considerable interest there too, and also in things like age-related hearing loss. Preclinical studies, so studies in animals or cells, suggest that NAG plus precursors might improve mitochondrial function in the brain, maybe help reduce the amyloid beta plaques you see in Alzheimer's, and even protect against hearing loss caused by noise, potentially through activating certain proteins.
So it seems like it could potentially touch on many of the major health challenges we face as we get older. What about things like muscle loss, sarcopenia, or metabolic issues like diabetes?
Animal studies have pointed towards benefits there as well. NAD plus supplementation seems to help combat age-related muscle wasting in some models, and it's shown promise in addressing metabolic diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes.
And how is it thought to be working? Is there a common thread?
Often, these positive effects are linked to the activation of a family of proteins called sirtuins. Sirtuins are really important regulators of cellular health and longevity pathways, and they crucially depend on NAD plus to function properly. So more NAD plus, potentially more sirtuin activity.
Sirtuins, right. It sounds like NAD plus is involved in a lot of fundamental processes that tend to go wrong as we age. Are there specific cellular mechanisms people point to?
Yeah, we're still figuring out all the details, of course, but NAD plus seems crucial for several of the recognized hallmarks of aging.
Hallmarks of aging. Okay.
Things like repairing damaged DNA, maintaining healthy mitochondria, both making new ones and clearing out damaged ones, a process called mitophagy, and also inducing autophagy, which is like the cell's waste disposal system. Many of these pathways involve activating key proteins like SRT1, which is a sirtuin, and AMPK, another major metabolic sensor, both of which need NAD+.
So it's really fundamental. What's the status of the research in humans? Are we seeing these kinds of benefits in clinical trials yet?
That's the big question, isn't it? There are numerous human clinical trials underway right now investigating the safety and effectiveness of NAD+ supplementation using NR or NMN for various metabolic and age-related conditions. We're still waiting for the full results from many of these larger, longer-term studies, but it's definitely a very active and promising area of human research.
Okay, so NAD plus is clearly a central player in the aging puzzle, and boosting it holds, well, significant potential, even if the human data is still coming in. Now let's move on to another intervention that's generated a lot of buzz in the longevity field. mTOR inhibitors, especially rapamycin. What are these, and what have we learned about their effects specifically in humans?
Right, rapamycin and related compounds, sometimes called rapalogs, work by inhibiting a protein called mTOR. mTOR is a key regulator of cell growth, metabolism, and importantly, it's also deeply involved in the aging process.
And it's famous because it extends lifespan in animals, right?
Exactly. Rapamycin has been shown quite consistently to extend lifespan in a variety of animal models, from yeast all the way up to mice. And that's led to considerable interest in its potential for human aging.
Okay, so there was a comprehensive review looking specifically at the human studies on rapamycin. What were the main takeaways from that?
Well, the review synthesized findings from a number of studies involving adults. It found that rapamycin derivatives did show some positive effects in specific areas. For instance, they seemed to enhance the immune response to flu vaccines.
Oh, interesting.
And they also demonstrated some benefits for people with rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay, so some specific therapeutic uses look promising. But what about broader anti-aging effects in generally healthy people? Did they find evidence for that?
That's where the evidence was much less clear, according to this review. They didn't find significant effects of rapamycin derivatives on the endocrine system or muscles or neurological systems in healthy individuals studied so far.
Any downsides reported?
There were some reports of modest increases in cholesterol and triglyceride levels in some studies, and an increased risk of infections was noted in certain patient groups, which isn't entirely surprising given its effects on the immune system.
Right.
However, there was one interesting finding from a study using rapamycin topically on the skin. That study showed a reduction in markers associated with skin aging.
So maybe topical use is different. And what about things like thinking skills or physical performance in healthy older adults?
Based on the studies included in that review, they didn't find significant improvements in those areas for healthy individuals. And results were kind of mixed in studies looking at neurodegenerative conditions or vision.
So it sounds like while it shows clear promise for certain conditions, the idea of using rapamycin widely just as a general anti-aging pill in humans, that still needs a lot more investigation.
That's exactly the conclusion. The review suggested that While rapamycin holds potential in areas like boosting specific immune responses or treating rheumatological conditions, its widespread use purely for anti-aging in humans requires more research and careful consideration of the potential side effects versus benefits.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered some fascinating biological approaches to aging senescent cells, NAD plus MMTOR. Now let's switch gears pretty significantly and dive into the technological realm with brain-computer interfaces, and specifically Neuralink. For anyone who's maybe not entirely familiar, what exactly is a BCI?
Right. A brain-computer interface, or BCI, is basically any technology that creates a direct communication link between the brain and an external device.
Like reading thoughts.
Well, maybe not thoughts in the complex sense, but reading brain activity. This can involve recording patterns of neural firing and translating those patterns into commands to control, say, a computer cursor or a prosthetic limb. Or in some cases, it could involve stimulating the brain to produce a specific sensation or response.
Okay. And Neuralink has obviously gotten a lot of attention as a leader in this field. What is it about their specific approach?
Neuralink, which was founded by Elon Musk, is really focused on creating very high bandwidth neural implants. Their device, called the N1, involves surgically implanting thousands of incredibly fine electrodes deep into the brain to record the activity of many individual neurons simultaneously.
Thousands.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious scale. This neural data is then processed and transmitted wirelessly to an external device like a computer or phone, where algorithms decode it into intended actions. Their current human trial, the PRIME study, is focused on individuals with severe paralysis.
It sounds like science fiction almost. And we have seen some pretty remarkable demonstrations recently of what their technology might be able to do.
We certainly have. The recent updates from Neuralink about their first human trial participant, Nolan Arbaugh, being able to control a computer cursor just by thinking. That's been quite significant. It really showcases the potential power of this technology for restoring lost function.
Absolutely. It's that incredible potential that makes this field so compelling. But, while we focus on the amazing possibilities, it's also really important to consider the cybersecurity side of things. What happens when you have a device directly plugged into the brain? What are the risks there?
That's a huge consideration.
Yeah.
With any connected technology, cybersecurity is critical. But with BCIs, the stakes are arguably much higher because they interact directly with our neural processes.
Right.
Experts have raised concerns about things like brain jacking, which is a term for unauthorized access or even control of the implant.
Yeah.
Imagine someone else being able to influence the device.
That's terrifying.
It is. There's also the risk of data exfiltration, stealing sensitive neural data. And perhaps even more unsettling is the potential for manipulating neural signals, which could theoretically have profound and unwanted effects on an individual's perceptions, emotions, or even actions.
The idea of someone hacking your mind, it's deeply disturbing. How could these kinds of attacks even happen? What are the weak points?
Well, potential attack vectors could include intercepting the wireless signals between the implant and the external device it talks to. There could also be vulnerabilities in the software, the firmware that runs on the implant itself, bugs that could be exploited. And in some scenarios, physical access to the device or its external components could also pose a risk.
So building in really strong security right from the very beginning seems absolutely essential. What kinds of protections are being thought about or developed for these neural implants?
Researchers and developers are definitely looking at a range of security measures. On the hardware side, things like secure bootloaders ensuring only authorized software can run, and maybe physical unclonable functions, or PUFs.
PUFs?
Yeah, they're like unique hardware fingerprints that make it harder to clone or tamper with the device. For the software and communication, obviously strong encryption is key, secure communication protocols, and maybe even things like multi-factor authentication for critical functions like software updates or accessing sensitive settings.
We've seen security problems with other medical devices before, haven't we? Like pacemakers or insulin pumps. Does that history tell us anything here?
It absolutely does. We've seen vulnerabilities discovered and, in some cases, exploited in devices like pacemakers and insulin pumps. We've even seen large-scale cyber attacks hitting hospital networks and connected medical systems. These real-world examples really hammer home the point that medical devices, including sophisticated ones like neural implants, are definitely potential targets and require rigorous, ongoing attention to cybersecurity. You can't just bolt it on later.
It's clearly a field where the pace of innovation needs to be matched by really robust safety and security engineering. Now, we mentioned the incredible story of Nolan Arbaugh, the first person with Neuralink's implant controlling a cursor. That really highlights the upside, the potential benefits.
It really does. His ability to regain a level of independence, to interact with technology, just using his thoughts in a way that wasn't possible for him before, it's genuinely inspiring and demonstrates the transformative potential of BCIs for people with paralysis and potentially many other conditions down the line.
And it feels like as this technology starts moving from the lab towards reality, there's a growing awareness of the need for, well, rules and regulations.
Yes, absolutely. There's a really active and important discussion happening right now about how best to regulate this rapidly evolving field. Things like ensuring the privacy and security of highly sensitive neural data, addressing the ethical questions around enhancement versus therapy, ensuring equitable access. These are all crucial points that need careful consideration as the technology matures. Some U.S. states, like Colorado and Minnesota, are starting to look at specific legislation around neurodata privacy.
So some initial steps are being taken.
Yes, but it's widely acknowledged that more comprehensive frameworks will be needed.
And Neuralink is maybe the most famous name, but they're part of this broader trend, sometimes called tech biohacking, right? Which involves all sorts of technologies interacting with their biology. How does security fit into that bigger picture?
That's a great point. Tech biohacking is a really broad term. It covers everything from, non-invasive wearable devices like smartwatches that track your heart rate or sleep, all the way to invasive technologies like BCIs.
Right.
And even those non-invasive devices collect sensitive biological data that needs protection. As we see more sophisticated technologies emerge, maybe AI-driven neurofeedback to train your brain or personalized neural stimulation, the amount and the sensitivity of the data being generated is just going to explode. So robust security measures become even more critical across that entire spectrum.
So it's not just about securing the implant itself, but the whole ecosystem, the apps, the cloud storage, the data analysis pipeline.
Exactly. The entire chain needs to be secure.
So looking ahead, what are some of the key things that need to happen to ensure these powerful neural interface technologies are developed and used safely and responsibly?
It really needs a multi-pronged approach. We need the development of cross-industry security standards, specifically designed for neural interfaces. We need greater transparency from companies like Neuralink about their technology, their data practices, and their security protocols. Users need to be empowered with clear information and control over their own neural data. And of course, regulations need to continue evolving thoughtfully to keep pace with the technology without stifling beneficial innovation. It's a delicate balancing act.
It really feels like we're standing at the threshold of a major shift in how technology interacts with our very being, our bodies, our brains. Incredible potential, but also, significant considerations.
That sums it up really well. The possibilities are immense, truly game-changing perhaps. But it's absolutely crucial that we proceed thoughtfully, ethically, and with a relentless focus on safety and security.
Well, this has been a really, really insightful deep dive into some genuinely cutting-edge areas of science and technology. Let's maybe try and recap some of the key points for everyone listening.
Sure. So we explored the really significant role that senescent cells play in the aging process and the promise that senolytics drugs that clear these cells show for potentially extending healthy lifespan, even when started late in life.
Right. Then we talked about NAD plus A, that vital molecule for cellular health, its decline with age, and the ongoing research into whether boosting it with precursors like NR or NMN can deliver real anti-aging benefits in humans. The animal data is promising. Human data is still coming.
Exactly. We also touched on rapamycin, an mTOR inhibitor known to extend lifespan in animals. In humans, the evidence points to specific benefits, like for the immune system or rheumatoid arthritis. But its use as a general anti-aging strategy needs more careful evaluation of risks and benefits.
And finally, we dove into the fascinating and maybe slightly unnerving world of brain-computer interfaces like Neuralink. We highlighted their incredible potential to restore function and transform lives, but also underscored the absolutely critical need for robust cybersecurity measures and careful ethical consideration as this technology develops.
That covers the main points, I think.
Yeah. It's clear that while, the dream of true immortality or reversing aging completely might still be a long way off, maybe even impossible, we are making tangible progress in understanding and potentially extending our healthy years through these kinds of scientific and technological advancements.
Absolutely. And as these fields continue to accelerate, it's just so important for all of us to think about the broader implications. How might these technologies reshape our lives, our society? What are the ethical lines we need to draw, and how do we ensure these powerful tools are used for good? These aren't just scientific questions anymore. They're societal ones.
A lot to mull over. Definitely encourage listeners to look deeper into some of the research and the work being done by the scientists and companies we touched on today. It's a space watching.
For
Okay,
sure.
well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another in-depth exploration of the science and technology shaping our future.